Hi, everybody. This is Professor Chima. Today I'm going to talk about Hinduism, the core concepts of the Mahabharata. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to begin by giving you a little bit of background on the Mahabharata, the text that we're reading. So, the Mahabharata is one of classical India's two central epic poems. There are two epic poems that define classical Indian culture, and the Mahabharata is one of them. The other poem is the Ramayana. And so, again, these two poems are comparable to the Iliad and the Odyssey in their stature and their cultural influence. However, something that's important to note is that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata still influence the religious worldview, the culture of Indians and South Asians today. So, for instance, like in the Odyssey and the Iliad, you wouldn't really say that you have, Greek peoples going out, performing libations for gods, performing sacrifices, to please the gods, unless they're, members of, like a club or something like that, or a fringe group. But today the you have Indians and you have Hindus who follow a lot of the cultural concepts and practices and the religious worldview that we find in the Mahabharata. So these poems are still linked to the way people think and practice culture today. Not 100%, obviously, because these poems are still written, a long, long time ago, but there is a strong connection to how people practice their culture today. So the story of the Mahabharata is a story of a civil war that breaks out between two branches of the royal family of Hastinapura. So that's important to remember. In Indian culture, you have traditionally the concept of an extended family system. If you ever go to an Indian wedding, you don't really have a wedding that's less than 200 to 500 attendees, and that's because the Indian family's structure usually is very large. And so the idea of a nuclear family doesn't really exist within traditional Indian culture. And so understanding that is important because a lot of the obligations, a lot of the conflicts within the story, the tensions that break up between the two branches of the cousins, the sense of different family members and them being pushed and pulled by this conflict, that is part of the extended family system, right? That comes from that particular social structure. The core heroes of this story are a band of demigod brothers called the Pandava brothers. And the Pandava brothers, again, in terms of their powers and in terms of their cultural influence, they're comparable to the Marvel superheroes, right, of the Marvel superhero universe. But in any case, the Pandava brothers are Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, and the twins Nakula and Sahadeva. So a quick note also, Indian names ending in A can be shortened, right, by removing the A. So sometimes Yudhishthira can be referred to as Yudhishthir, Bhima can be referred to as Bhim, Arjuna can be referred to as Arjun, right? And in fact, these are actually common names for Indians today. Like you will go to if you go to India or you interact with Indian communities here, you will find people called Arjun, right? And this again is in reference to the enormous cultural impact of a story like the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was compiled, again, a very long time ago, between the 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. So it's a very long span of time, 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. As with the Odyssey, it starts out as oral literature or oral stories. And the final shape, the final form of the story took shape in the 4th century CE. Also similar to the Odyssey, that the core event that this story describes, a civil war that breaks out, within a royal family. It actually happened. It is most likely a historical event, but the way that the story gets retold with magical occurrences and supernatural events, that is part of the oral storytelling format and genre that develops, right? The way the story gets transmitted over time. So that comes from the storytelling, but there is a core historical event that actually happened that this event is recycling, right? Just like with the Odyssey. And this story is attributed to a legendary sage called Vyasa, who makes a very interesting cameo in the beginning of the story. And like the Odyssey, right, with Homer, we don't know if Homer really existed or if multiple people composed the story over many centuries, which is quite likely. The same goes with Vyasa, right? He might have been an actual person transmitting the story, but again, there's no way to be sure. He's kind of a legendary figure, like Homer. So if any of y'all are Percy Jackson fans, which I am, there's also a modern sort of fictional young adult recreation of the Indian mythological universe, right? Percy Jackson is an homage, an adaptation of the Odyssey and the Iliad. And so in the Rick Riordan Presents book series, you have Roshani Chokshi's book series, Arusha and the End of Time. There are about 5 novels within the series. And so you have the Pandava brothers get reincarnated as the Pandava sisters, right? And they meet, some of the famous gods and goddesses within the Indian mythological pantheon. It's pretty readable. It's definitely readable. I recommend it. The books I think do get stronger over the course of the series, and yeah, it's a fun read. So here, let's go ahead and talk about Hinduism. So Hinduism, this is the cultural, this is the religious worldview of the Mahabharata. So we do need to understand a few important concepts within Hinduism for various aspects of the story of the Mahabharata to make sense. So the largest religion in the world is Christianity in terms of numbers of followers. Islam is the second largest. Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world with 1.2 billion followers. So, in terms of where Hindus are normally settled, surprise, surprise, the most number of Hindus are in India itself. You have also quite a number of Hindus living in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Burma, Indonesia. And so this Indian diaspora is the Indian diaspora that occurred as a result of the Silk Road, right? And so this older sort of diaspora of Indian culture and Indian religion, right, as a result of this extremely old global trading system that we now call the Silk Road. But also you have the Indian and a pretty wide Indian diaspora as a result of European colonization. So because India was colonized for around 200 years by the British, right? So you have, because of education, most Indians and South Asians, because I also include Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka within this geographic cultural entity that we called India. So most South Asians speak English quite well, and so because of cultural links with the Commonwealth countries, because of education, you also find a very large South Asian diaspora in North America and Canada, South Africa, and Australia. In addition, you also have, just because of globalization, a very large South Asian diaspora in the Middle East, in places like Dubai and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for work and trade and those kinds of purposes. So, full disclosure, I'm also a member of the South Asian diaspora. My parents are originally from Pakistan, and Pakistan and India used to be the same place, the same country, but they separated into two different countries in 1947 when this region got independence from Britain. So when we talk about classical Indian civilization, we're also talking about the theory of how it came to be, of how the civilization evolved. We're talking about the Aryan migration theory. So the idea is that classical Indian civilization, the period of time that the Mahabharata is situated in, begins as a result of waves of migration from the Central Asian steppes, which is like this region close to the Black Sea, which corresponds to modern day Ukraine, Turkey, Russia, this sort of region right here. So again, the way this theory goes is that you have waves of migration of Indo-European speaking peoples using the invention of the horse chariot down to the rich, fertile Indian subcontinent. And then, these waves of migration, according to most archaeologists and historians, start around 2000 BCE and last until 1600, 1500 BCE. The Indian Europeans are, are lighter skinned. They speak Indo-European languages, right? And so there's this immense mixing that takes place between these migrants and the indigenous Indian populations living in India. So you already had a very fertile and wealthy civilization in India, especially the Indus Valley civilization, which whose archaeological ruins can still be found in modern day Pakistan. And so in the Indus Valley civilization, you have settled cities, you have the ruins. You know, if you go to those ruins, you can see roads, drains, settled planned cities. It's really quite astonishing to think that a civilization that started 3300 BCE has this level of urban development. And I've had the opportunity to go to some of their ruins. So there's this immense cultural mixing that takes place between the Aryan migrants and the indigenous Indian populations. And so what happens is that at some point, right, this racial, ethnic, linguistic, cultural mixing that's taking place freezes. There's the institution of what we call the caste system, which is a system of socially, hierarchically organizing Indian society within four main castes, which have multiple subcastes within them. So I'll talk a little bit more about the caste system going forward, but again, there's this idea that classical Indian civilization is the result, the meeting of two groups of people, the Indo-European peoples migrating downwards, and the indigenous Indians of the Indus Valley civilization. It's the result of this incredible mixing that takes place, but this mixing for some reason freezes in this hierarchical system of social organization that we call the caste system. So that is the Aryan migration theory. Also, a quick note also, since I've mentioned colonization, the way that this got discovered is that during British colonization in the 18th, 19th centuries, you had linguists like William Jones who knew like 19 languages, who began learning Sanskrit and Hindi and other Indian languages. And they started noticing a lot of linguistic similarities between Sanskrit and Eastern European languages, Lithuanian or German, right? They notice these similarities. And so tracing the linguistic trails between these language groups led them to understand that there's some kind of mixing that took place between the progenitors of Eastern European Germanic peoples and the Indo-Aryans who migrated to India. I also want to talk about Hindu gods and goddesses. There's no way for me to cover all of them, but I do want to touch on some of the major ones who influenced the course of the story in the Mahabharata. So, India has thousands of gods and goddesses, but what's quite interesting is that there's this idea that all these gods and goddesses are emanations of aspects of a single creator spirit who resembles the Judeo-Christian Islamic idea of a creator god in many ways. So this single creating cosmic spirit is called the Brahman. So once again, the Brahman is the cosmic spirit who created the universe, mankind, all of reality. This is the creating creator spirit. The Brahman created the universe and mankind by uttering the mystic sacred sound Om. So when you go to yoga class and they have you recite, say Om, that is where this is coming from. This idea that this is the divine word that brings creation into being. And in fact, Om is part of many Indian sutras and mantras. So this is the divine word that brings creation into being. Once again, the idea is that all gods and goddesses emerged from Brahman and embody Brahman's various attributes, such as preservation of life, as in Vishnu, or wealth and sustenance, like the goddess Lakshmi does. And then there's also the idea that Brahman created into all individual souls. The individual soul of a single person is called Atman, right? I have an Atman, you all have an Atman. And so these are created by and emanating from Brahman. So again, there's this idea that we are all interconnected and tied to Brahman, and through breathing and meditation and other holy practices, Hindus believe that the individual Atman can gain a connection with Brahman. So again, fascinating similarities with in terms when we talk about Brahman with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and also quite a lot of similarities with Buddhism, which is not surprising because Buddhism is started by an Indian prince, Siddhartha Gautama. So after the Brahman, the main sort of set of gods that you need to know is what is called the Trimurti, or the trio of major gods. And these are, once again, these gods embody aspects and attributes of Brahman. So you have Brahma, who's the creator god, who embodies the attribute, the aspect of creation. In Indian mythology, Brahma is not is not that predominant, because the idea is that, okay, once creation is done, it's done. You don't really have to do it that much, right? You're just kind of retired at that point. So Brahma, once again, to distinguish from Brahman, this is, you can see Brahma here on the left of this image of the Trimurti. And so yeah, takes a much more passive role in mythology. Next, you have Vishnu, who is the god who preserves and sustains life on earth, the preserver and sustainer. So Vishnu embodies Brahman's attribute of preservation of life. Vishnu is very active in Hindu mythology. He's everywhere in Hindu mythology. And because he's the god who sustains life, the idea is that you really can't sustain life without wealth and right and means of sustenance. And so Vishnu is quite often depicted dressed in jewels and golden crowns and sort of golden belts and things like that. So Brahma has the white beard, the four faces. Vishnu, the golden crowns, jewels, holding a lotus flower, which is a symbol of, prosperity, right? And then the final god in this Trimurti is Shiva, who's the god of destruction, change, and transformation. And here you have Shiva on the right-hand side of this image. You can see him with matted hair. You can see him holding the trident. And Shiva also has he's kind of wearing snakes around his neck. And so one thing I do want to emphasize is that in Indian mythology, the word destruction doesn't have negative connotations like it does like in our Western framework. So the idea is that you can't have creation, you can't have renewal without destruction. And so Shiva embodies this divine cosmic act of destruction as a way of renewal, as a way of making and opening a path for the renewal and the continuance of life. And so Shiva is an incredibly holy figure revered by Hindus, and he's also the ascetic god. He's the god who lives. He's thought to live on the tops of the Himalayan mountains and the snow-capped peaks, and he's always in a state of asceticism, of meditation. So Shiva is incredibly important. So again, each of these gods has a consort goddess, a wife, right? And so Shiva's wife is the goddess Parvati, who's the divine mother goddess, right? And so Parvati is the goddess you pray to for protection, as a mother would give protection to her children. The goddesses also embody more, they're kind of also seen as ways to kind of mediate with their god consort, right? So if you want to mediate with Shiva, then Parvati, praying to Parvati is the way to go. So one thing to kind of I should mention is that in the Indian in the Crash Course Mythology Indian Pantheon video that I gave you guys, the narrator describes Parvati and Durga as two separate women who are married to Shiva, and that's actually not true. So Parvati again is the mother goddess, and so her more fierce and warrior-like aspect is Durga. So for instance, if you threaten her followers, if you threaten her people, she's going to transform into this powerful warrior goddess called Durga, and you don't want to mess with Durga. So Shiva actually only has one consort that he's incredibly loyal to, who is Parvati, and Durga is just a another version, like another emanation, a form, or I should say, another form of hers. The god Vishnu, the god of preservation of life, his consort is Lakshmi, who's the goddess of wealth and prosperity. And so, if you want to start a business, if you want to get rich, then Lakshmi is the goddess to pray to. Brahma, his consort is the goddess Saraswati, who's the goddess of knowledge, music, and the arts. And so, this again points to how important arts, music, art, architecture are within classical Indian culture. And so, very quickly, the last god that I'll mention from this image is the god Ganesh, who is the elephant-headed god, who is the son of Shiva and Parvati. Ganesh, there are many fascinating legends about Ganesh, and so he's also the kind of considered to be the god of luck. And so, if you want to get luck, you pray to an icon of Ganesh, which many Hindus do. So here I'm just going to show you some images of the Trimurti gods, just to kind of again reinforce their main aspects. Brahma is the creator god who embodies the attribute of creation of Brahman. And so again, he is, depicted as an old, wise, revered figure with four heads. He's holding the text of the Vedas in his right hand, and he's holding a lotus flower in his left. Here is another image of Brahma. This is a Far East Asian statue of Brahma. So once again, this points to the Silk Road and the influence that India had over Southeast Asia and East Asia, right, as a result of trade networks that unified these regions. So yeah, you can kind of see Brahma, but with more East Asian features. Something that's important to know about these various gods is that they also have an animal mount. So the animal mount of Brahma is a swan, Hamsa. So again, each god has a special animal mount or animal vehicle. Think of, if you're fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender, think of Aang and Appa, right? So it's that idea. And yes, Nickelodeon absolutely pulled a lot from Indian mythology to create that series. Shiva, again, just to kind of give you some images of Shiva. So here again, as I mentioned, he's the god of meditation. This is a statue of Shiva somewhere in India. And so you see his eyes closed in meditation. On his forehead, you see the third eye, which represents your kind of your connection with the cosmic, with the cosmic wholeness of reality. And so Shiva's third eye again signifies that he is meditating, he's ascetic, he's deeply tapped in with the Brahman. Also have Shiva again, you have the Nagas, the snakes wrapped around Shiva. And so the snake, the Naga in Indian mythology, is a very sacred animal. The snake mediates between life and death, between the seen world and the unseen world. So again, it's not a negative animal as it is within, say, a biblical context. It's actually a powerful and holy animal within the Indian context. So you have on the right-hand side, you have an icon that's very famous of Shiva dancing the Tandav. I gave you a video of the Tandav dance, and it's again a dance that's been performed for centuries. And so Tandav is the cosmic dance of destruction, renewal, and creation. And so Shiva is considered to be the Lord of Dance, the god of dance. And so you have the Tandav here on the right. And so there are many TV serials and films in that have been made that have been made in South Asia about these mythological figures. And here I just have a still of Shiva and Parvati in the Himalayas, from an Indian TV series. Shiva's divine mount is the bull Nandi. And so one of the reasons that it's considered taboo in many Indian households to eat beef, right? Traditionally Hindus, I should say, do not eat beef, and that's because Nandi is a holy figure because she is the divine mount of Shiva, and so she's considered to share in aspects of his godhood. So for that reason, the idea of the cow being sacred comes from this. Vishnu, I just have some images of Vishnu again. He's dressed up, decked up in gold and golden crowns and golden jewelry. Here you have Vishnu and Lakshmi. This is a stela of Vishnu, right? That's made in the Punjab. Which is where my family comes from. And so you have, again, you can see this elaborate carving and, just a beautiful artwork. And this is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The divine animal mount of Vishnu is the eagle Garuda. And here I have some interesting images of Vishnu, right, riding Garuda. And there are some other Hindu gods that I'd like you to know to again to understand the world of the Mahabharata a little bit better. So you have, as we know from the Mahabharata, the fathers of the Pandava brothers are all gods because their father Pandu has been cursed, right, for the taboo of killing a deer who's actually a celestial being in disguise. And so Pandu cannot have sexual relations with his wives, and for that reason, um, his wives, right, Kunti and Madri, they learn holy mantras and incantations to call upon gods to be able to have children with, so that the royal lineage can continue. So one of these gods is Yama, the god of death. You also find Yama appear in Buddhism. And so Yama obviously is the father of Yudhishthira, the oldest Pandava brother. Vayu is the god of wind, and so Vayu is the father of Bhim or Bhima. And so because winds are very powerful, especially during the Indian monsoon, Bhim is considered to be the most physically strong, the muscle man of the Pandava brothers. You have Indra, the god of lightning and thunder, who's the king of the heavens. And so Indra is very similar to Zeus in his powers, and he's also a player like Zeus is. And so Indra is the father of Arjuna, who's the most powerful of the Pandava brothers, and in some ways the main protagonist of the story. And so again, I'm giving you this slide to be able to show you that again this mythological world that we're describing, which influences the stories of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, this is part of the lived reality again for many Hindus. It shapes the spaces, both domestic and sacred, in India and also in the Indian diaspora. So as an example of that, I'm just giving you some examples from architecture and sculpture. In the middle here, I have an image of Ganesh. This is just from an altar in an Indian household. If you go to an Indian home, chances are that you will see an image or an icon or idol of Ganesh. At the very bottom here, I have a miniature painting from, a pre-modern book of miniature paintings, which are again a form of painting very popular in pre-modern India, of Krishna, who I will talk about in just a bit, with his lover Radha. Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu, but I'll talk about that in just a second. On the left here, I have the Trimurti gods, right? Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, who are carved on the walls of the Halebidu temple in Karnataka, India. And then here on the top right, I have an image of a famous temple in Tanjavur, India. And this temple is this is in South India, and it's quite extraordinary because you have on the walls and the structure of the temple, you have images of Indian mythological stories carved right on the structure. So you have images of gods and goddesses and nymphs who are called apsaras in Indian mythology. So again, this again just shows you that this mythology still influences real lived reality today. Now I want to talk about the concept of the avatar, and this is important for understanding the Mahabharata and for understanding um, the some of the most important relationships that Arjuna will form in the story. And so the concept of avatar, once again, I love Aang the Last Airbender, but Nickelodeon did not come up with the concept. This is borrowed from Indian mythology, right? Avatar literally means descent in Sanskrit, and it's the idea that whenever there's corruption or instability or chaos in the world, the preserver god, Vishnu, the god of preservation and sustenance of life, this god will take upon a human or animal form and descend down upon earth to correct the earth, to restore balance on earth, right? And so in Hindus believe that in world history, Vishnu has had 10 avatars, right? He's taken upon 10 different forms and 10 different time periods to restore balance. And so among Vishnu's avatars, you have Rama, who's the protagonist, the hero of the Ramayana. And you all he's another of Vishnu's avatars is Krishna, who is an important character that we're going to meet in the Mahabharata. Krishna is a king, and he's also the best friend of Arjuna. He's also Arjuna's counselor, political advisor, and his chariot driver. So Krishna is once again the avatar of Vishnu descending upon earth to restore balance in the world of the Mahabharata because due to the political system, due to other conflicts, the world has gone out of whack. So, and Krishna says to Arjuna, whenever there's a decline of righteousness or dharma, right, the idea of dharma as righteousness, and the rise of unrighteousness, then I send forth myself. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of righteousness, I come into being from age to age. So, once again, this is the idea of the avatar. So, couple of concepts in Indian worldview, some of which I've covered. Once again, in classical India, this is a universe of gods, goddesses, heroes, and sages. A quick note about sages. Sages are very important to Indian mythology, and you don't want to mess with a sage, right? Sages are considered to be very powerful. When you meet a sage, the image that you should get is of a man who's spending his time in meditation. His hair is probably matted and very long. He's probably covered in earth and dust. He's probably dressed in rags, right? He's kind of wandering in the wilderness, just spending his time in meditation um, and reciting holy mantras. He's an educator, very learned. And because of the meditation, because of this energy that the sage is spending in devotions and reciting mantras, the sage in Indian culture usually is considered to have magical, quasi-magical powers. So everywhere in Indian mythology, you have stories of, maybe people doing, wronging a sage, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, and then really bad things happen. You don't want to mess with a sage. Sages are, by the way, called rishis in Indian mythology. So yes, sages are incredibly important. In the Mahabharata, there's, for instance, like at one part in the beginning of the story, you have, there's this issue of, okay, we need to extend the family line. And so Bhishma, right, he goes out and he kidnaps three princesses, Amba, Ambika, and Bambalika, to marry his half-brother so that the line can continue. However, the half-brother dies without issue. And so Bhishma's stepmom, right? And so she's the queen. She is concerned that there is no one to continue the family line. So what do we do? And so she calls upon a son that she had had before her marriage to the king, right? Out of wedlock. And so the son is Vyasa, the author of this, the purported author of the story, and also a sage, a rishi. So because he's coming from the wilderness, he's, you know, again, looks like a wild man. And so he is the one who has, sexual relations with two of the princesses so that the family line can continue. And so one of the princesses closes her idea, her sorry, so one of the princesses closes her eyes, and so her son Dhritarashtra is born blind, right? And the other princess turns pale with fright, and so her son Pandu, right, the royal father, the non-biological royal father, right, of the Pandava brothers, is born pale. So this comes from the idea that, you want to pay a lot of respect to the rishis, the sages. You don't want to offend them. You don't want to be repulsed by them because of their physical appearance, because again, they're not paying attention to how they look. They're spending their time in meditation and devotion. So again, there's this idea that if you don't pay them the proper respect, then consequences can arise from that. So I wanted to explain that aspect of the story. We've talked about Avatar. I'll talk more about the idea of samsara and reincarnation going forward, but very quickly in Indian mythology, it's comparable with Buddhism in that the idea is that death is not the end, that a person's soul, the Atman, is reincarnated after death into a new life form, right? Um, Depending upon how good or bad that they acted in the previous life. And so samsara is the idea of cyclicity of life, right? So again, reincarnation, the soul continues to get reincarnated in different life forms after death, right? There's that idea, which Buddhism took from Hinduism. There's the idea of the extended family system. There's the idea of caste system, which I will talk further in a upcoming video. And there's also the idea of righteousness, acting righteously, or dharma, which I'll also talk more in a further video. I hope this coverage was helpful. Happy reading, and I'll see you guys next time.